Hello, I'm Mary Murray. I'm the curator of modern and contemporary art at Munson Williams Proctor Arts Institute in Utica, New York. Welcome to Art and Yoga from Home. I'll begin with a brief chat about a work of art in the museum's collection, and at 10:30 we will have yoga practice. Please make a contribution if you're able to help support this program. Thank you. It's Memorial Day weekend, and in this pandemic pause, the toll has been alarming in the past 2 months, and we find ourselves without our traditional rituals for mourning and for ways of processing our grief, which is probably the origins of Memorial Day. In the post-Civil War period, General John Logan, who was a leader of a veterans group, declared that May 30th, 1868, should be a day for honoring and remembering the war dead. He described it as a day, quote, for the purpose of strewing with flowers or otherwise decorating the graves of comrades who died in defense of their country, and whose bodies now lie in almost every city, village, and hamlet churchyard in the land. Here in these United States in the 21st century, all of us probably have a war that defines our life. Of course, currently, the United States has been at war for almost a generation, for nearly 20 years. And I would like to honor the service people, many of whom have made several tours of Iraq and Afghanistan, including my nephews, Joseph and Edward, and to thank the families who have made a terrible sacrifice and have lost a family member to this war. We honor that and thank you for it. War has unfortunately been the source of much great literature in our country, and of course historically. I read an excerpt right now from a poem, a contemporary poem by Reginald Gibbons, titled Memorial Day. A corps of 6 men, they bear the heavy coffined corpse of the father toward his very small opening in the planet. White gloves lift up the draped, famed cloth, superstriped and starry. Folded just so, hands with hands over hands, in ritual honor. A grateful nation, and so on. Many people here in Utica have come here fleeing war in other parts of the world, and their war dead are buried on other continents. Of course, the Vietnam War was at the center of the violent and volatile 1960s, dividing families and cutting across political lines and generations. The Korean War, we see the evidence of it's still in a divided nation. My own beloved favorite old soldier is my father, who was a World War II veteran serving in the Pacific. And I'm reminded of the State of the Union address that Franklin Roosevelt gave in January of 1941, prior to the United States entering World War II. This is known as his Four Freedoms speech. The freedom of speech, the freedom of worship, the freedom from want, and the freedom from fear. And you may be familiar with Norman Rockwell's illustrations of this speech, most famously the Freedom from Want, the family gathered around the Thanksgiving table. Now, FDR's agenda was to encourage the United States, its Congress and citizenry, to rethink our isolationist policy in the post-World War I era. For FDR, these freedoms belonged to everyone, everywhere in the world. And with fascism spreading around the globe, this speech was a cautionary tale for the United States to pay attention. And I quote excerpts from it. FDR said, "No realistic American can expect from a dictator's peace, international generosity, or a return of true independence, or world disarmament, or freedom of expression, or of religion, or even good business." So the work of art I chose to talk about today was created at the depths of World War II. September 1943, probably in Minnesota, by an artist named Adolf Dane, who was an American living between 1895 and 1968. He had spent the 1920s in Europe illustrating cafe society, cafe culture, and making satiric images of the wealthy and the bourgeois. When he returned to the United States and he was well over 40, he began making watercolors. And within 10 years, he had actually written a manual about watercolor painting. And he describes technical tips and also choosing subject matter, like a landscape. And he would make a quick sketch on site, but he never painted en plein air at the place, citing many different annoyances, including sun and rain and wind and dust, and perhaps most annoying, the curious passerby. He was not a reporter. He created a composition that would be most pleasing in an aesthetic sense. So here, let's look at this watercolor down on the farm. He has placed the red barn on a diagonal so that it exists on the line of the ridge of that hill, and it takes our eye backward into space. So the scene is not something that is on a single plane. Similarly, he has created in the middle ground this massing of the tree leaves, and he uses a variety of shades of green to give us a sense of shadow and light, and perhaps a sense of the leaves on the trees moving in the breeze. Louise. And then notice that the line of the clouds, in some respects, echoes the line of the trees, and that white of the sky, in turn, complements the dark foreground of the farmyard dirt. And he enlivens that farmyard with a gaggle of geese and chicken that are all very busy about their business of being farm animals. Now, it's a remarkably ordinary, an extraordinarily ordinary slice of Americana from an extraordinarily extraordinary moment in history, a time of global unrest. And I suppose it's shamelessly nostalgic of me to have picked this image. But just the same, I suppose it also reflects that while things are so unknown, while the future is difficult to imagine, I'm also reminded of the Greek myth of Pandora, who, like Eve in the Judeo-Christian tradition, is the culprit who unleashes chaos into the world by opening up a forbidden box. And after war and, yes, pestilence and plague are set upon humankind, Pandora hears still another small voice emanating from the box. And when she opens it once again, it's the voice of hope. Until next time, I wish you good health and good spirits. Namaste.